If I were to ask you what comes to mind when you think of conspiracy theories, what's the first thing you think of? Is it a certain person with a very gravelly voice? Or maybe that one uncle that always truth bombs on the Thanksgiving table? Or if you're chronically online, it may be an image like this. These surreal Photoshop collages that visualize modern conspiracy theories in a very, very unique way. When I first came across these images, I thought they were satire. Often they were used in memes that said something along the lines of what it feels like waking up and immediately watching TikToks and vaping. And it would show an image like this puppy being injected with something next to a 5G tower. Loads of subtle commentary, huh? Well, it turns out that these were not created with the intention of being satire entirely. They were, in fact, a somewhat serious attempt at depicting modern conspiracies in a visual means by someone who believed in them. And that man who created them, well, his name was David Dees. David was born in the July of 1957 in New Orleans, Louisiana. His father was a math professor, and David would inherit much of his father's mental capabilities, being a near-perfect student growing up and eventually being accepted to the Emory University, which is about a 15% acceptance rate. He was on track to obtain a good degree from a good school, but he didn't feel like he was on the right path. You see, David had possessed a desire to be an artist from a young age. According to an interview from the documentary Do You See What I See, which is a short biopic on David, David's father came across a painting of a snowy mountain that he liked one day, but he couldn't afford it. It was outside the price range. So in an attempt to bring the beauty of the painting into his own home, David's father decided to paint it himself. David watched as his father meticulously recreated the scene, learning the process of painting along the way. Art was David's true passion, and he decided to pursue his dream. He would drop out of Emory and enroll in a commercial art college where he would hone in his artistic skills. David's new dream was now to become an airbrush painter and create custom decals for cars and motorcycles. He saw no greater honor than having his art enhance the beauty of a machine and being noticed by people every day. Ultimately, he dreamed of the idea of notoriety. However, David would end up finding a much more professional career path, becoming one of 5 designers at Graphic Group Incorporated, a small local design firm which specialized in advertisements in newspapers and magazines. David worked with them for a few years creating said advertisements, but he was never fond of the work, and he often compared it to working in a sweatshop. In 1984, with a decent resume under his belt, David would quit the group and he would move out west to Los Angeles, California, where he would create his own studio, Dees Illustrations. And he would become relatively successful as a freelancer, gaining very notable clients, such as Disney, Paramount Home Video, Hanna-Barbera, Life Magazine, Time Magazine, Coca-Cola, and among many more. But there was one important contract that he would obtain, and that would be with Sesame Street magazine. Yes, Sesame Street, the Muppets. His art would appear every month over the course of 13 years, making 7 covers and 4 whole books worth of Muppet drawings. Well, during those 13 years, David would also embrace the changing world and start using digital art tools, such as Photoshop, as a replacement for his traditional acrylic and airbrush paint. Why did he switch to this digital form and stop doing it airbrush style, the way that he loved so much? Was he just simply trying to keep up with the times, you ask? Well, actually, he did it to not die. The acrylic paint David was using possessed a chemical called cadmium, which was just slightly less toxic than lead. The years of cadmium exposure due to airbrushing the paint had inflicted severe health effects upon David. He admits mostly physical, but cadmium has also been linked to psychological effects as well. This health scare resulted in David becoming a bit of a recluse. He had no reason to leave his home as he didn't work in an office or even a studio anymore, seeing that he had updated his artistic medium. So, in this newfound isolation, David began his delve into the depths of the internet head first. As he traversed the digital abyss, he started to find himself on stranger and stranger parts of the web, and he became deeply invested in the world of conspiracy theories. After a certain event in September of 2001, David had started his process of quote-unquote waking up. Like many conspiracy theorists, 9/11 was his catalyst. At this point, David's career did possibly one of the most extreme shifts that you can imagine, something comparable to what we're seeing of Kanye West right now. David shifted the focus of his new artwork away from cheery children's shows to exposing the Zionist global elites' many, many evil plans. As you can imagine, this was a bit of a problem for his professional life, seeing that his boss at Sesame Street magazine was in fact Jewish. After a confrontation with her about Zionism, David found himself unemployed and disheartened with America. So he made the bold move to flee to Sweden in 2003. Why Sweden, you ask? Well, in David's own words, its government was less hostile towards its people. 3 years later, in 2006, David started making political satire imagery. And it was this shift that started a massive change in David's life. Again, according to the man himself, this was the first time he had started making art for his own enjoyment, and making art as a means of expression. He had always commissioned his own art, and had used his talent as a means of employment. Now he was free of those constraints, and he started to create art that he believed in. And it would be through this new topic that he developed a very solid following. David was very well versed in the world of conspiracy, and he created captivating, abrasive, uncanny, and overall uniquely sophisticated yet crude images depicting every conspiracy one could think of. This one is a personal favorite of mine. The Terminator cop protecting the human free zone has made me laugh many times. Of course, 5G melting baby is another favorite. The list goes on. Think of any conspiracy theory, and David has probably visualized it into this medium. He made his genre of images royalty-free as well. So the conspiracy media and doomsday prep media communities could spam these images at large, which is a very prominent reason why he gained so much success. Aside from the royalty-free images, David also did some commissioned work in the new political satire style for various alt-media enterprises as well. At this point in his strange career, David found himself to be the premier artist of conspiracy theorists nationwide, which naturally painted a target on his back due to the unsavory ideas many conspiracy theories peddle. In 2008, the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, would highlight him in a negative way, and to David, one of his greatest feats was being reported on by the Times of Israel, which he took strange pride in. David would eventually move back to the United States, particularly Oregon, in 2010. He fled Sweden because he believed that he had become the victim of gang stalking and was the subject of Zionist New World Order surveillance, and he also thought he had been injected with nanobots. Well, his life was much different in Oregon. He had 18 bunnies and several cats, and started to focus more on his health and the community he lived in, making art for the local businesses around him and singing in a nearby hospice. And in 2020, David would die of cancer at the age of 62, in the very hospice he had grown so fond of performing in. David's art is some of my favorite shit I've seen on the internet. If there's something you should know about me, it's that I like weird Photoshop art, and art from people who are insane, as I've demonstrated in previous videos. And David, well, he encapsulates both of them. His Photoshop process is very famous to other great Photoshop artists. David would first draw the outline of the scene he imagined, then spend hours finding the proper images that would work in his scene. He had specific requirements for angles of the photography, and the lighting needed to be perfect as well. The compositions would end up being a few hundred layers total. It would be comprised of often dozens of different images. And as I mentioned earlier, the results were astonishing, to say the least. But this was obviously done with some sort of intention. A part of David's design philosophy was that these images were to be an awakening for the masses. So how would the 5G melting child awake anyone, you ask? Well, it catches people's attention. All of these images were created really to just demand attention. They stand out with extreme colors, harsh imagery, politically divisive symbols and people, and by their nature, they were just controversial. We also have to remember that David did start his art as a form of satire. And yes, we are fully aware that he openly believed in all of the conspiracies he made art about, but he also depicted them in a hyperbolic and satirical way. To him, the message was there, But that doesn't mean the insanity of many of the conspiracies he believed in couldn't also be depicted as just that: insanity. And on the note of insanity, there's the other big question. What drives a man from making children's art to becoming the most famous conspiracy artist on the internet? We have the given answer that 9/11 really woke him up, but as I alluded to before, I think the answer lies in his airbrush painting cadmium exposure. Clearly, that had an effect on David long term. And that, coupled with self-imposed isolation and deep dives onto the internet, well, that's a probable cause for insanity. A man who had been mentally poisoned by harmful chemicals and metaphorically poisoned by extreme political rhetoric and social isolation. David's story, though interesting, is a sad one when viewed from this angle. But ultimately, I'm glad this Photoshop wizard made the art he did, and he has certainly left a notable mark on the internet abyss. Thank you for watching. If you're still here and haven't already considered subscribing and liking this video, please do. It helps me as a little baby YouTuber a lot. What do you think of David's artwork? Conspiracies aside, I think they're great. They're very funny images. What would you like to see in the next video? Just let me know in the comments, people. Bye-bye.